bid.
Hello again. Some time ago, a young woman dressed up as an old woman. She went to a greengrocer's. When she was eventually served, she asked for just 2 tomatoes. The greengrocer told her he didn't sell stuff in such tiny amounts. Later, the same day, the same woman, now out of her disguise, went back to the same greengrocer's, asked for the same thing, just 2 tomatoes, and well, you tell me, did she get served at all? Did she get served more quickly? Yep. She got service with a smile and a joke. Wonderful, isn't it? Another prejudice about third wave people is that they should sink without trace into conventional retirement. They're pictured pottering in the garden, doing a bit of walking, bird watching, fret sawing, grandbaby sitting, you know the sort of thing. Nothing wrong with pottering or bird watching, of course, but equally nothing wrong with different things either. It's certainly true that the third wave are not the only section of society who get thought about in the wrong way. There's no monopoly on isms, after all. But despite that, let's not lose sight of the fact that ageism is just as odious and pervasive as sexism, racism, or any other ism, especially when the old themselves begin to believe all the assumptions made about them and drift into leading lives far less fulfilling than they might otherwise be. This afternoon's film echoes this theme exactly, because today we feature 2 third wavers, Ray and Alan, who on retirement did not bury their head in the sand, they buried it in the sea. What had been a part-time interest when they had a full-time job has now become their full-time activity. They never had the time before to really devote themselves to exploring the underworld of the sea. Now they can, and it has led them to an area of invaluable research. Let's dive in then to their fascinating world.
I was originally a carpenter and trained as a carpenter. I'm fully qualified, but for most of my working life I didn't use my tools at all because I was doing office work, going out seeing customers and buying materials and things like that, doing accounts. And a very interesting job really, because you had a broad spread of work to do, and it kept you pretty occupied, you know.
Well, my career started by going into the local council offices in Wilmslow in Cheshire in 1939, and I was in there for a short time when the war broke out, and the and subsequently to that, I went away into the Air Force for 4.5 years. Came back again to the local council and stayed there until 1951, studying for accountancy exams, etc.
What started me off into diving was seeing Hans Hess underwater films, and I thought, now I've got to do that. And well, in fact, my wife bought my first pair of flippers and snorkel, and I think she's regretted it ever since. I didn't start diving until I was 36, something like that. And in fact, I couldn't even swim at that time. I had to learn to swim and dive at the same time. And I've always been interested in wildlife, even from a child, you know. And when I went underwater, there were all these new forms of wildlife to look at, and it just fascinated me. I just got hooked on it, really. I mean, I've always felt very privileged, actually, because I feel I've had two lives, one down there and one up here.
Strangely enough, I think the feeling when you first do your duck dive and start to descend, you leave behind, you know, all the normal world, and you enter a totally different one. And I think it always gives you a sense of exhilaration, even now. The first dive I had was the most terrible experience I've had in diving, because we went down to Lamorna Cove with the Royal Naval people, and they provided equipment, including weight belts and all the rest of it, and this big burly petty officer strapped all this gear onto me. And we went out sort of with snorkels and changed over to the breathing apparatus. And I was very much underweight. So he grabbed me and yanked me down. And my ears were popping and I couldn't even get to my mask because he grabbed my arm to pull me down. And my ears were paining me. And then he let go and you'd shoot up like a cork. And then he'd grab you and pull you back again. And the whole thing was a complete disaster. And it took about a fortnight for my ears to settle down afterwards.
Well, just about that time, a public meeting was called to form a sub-aqua club, and I thought, this is for me. And I went to the first meeting, and this is where I met Alan. That's the first time I met him, as he went to this meeting as well. And we are now the only two founder members of the club left.
The curious thing in those days was that everybody, in effect, was so short of money that the equipment was very difficult to come by. To raise £5 for a suit or to make material to make a suit was difficult. And in fact, to begin with, we did in fact make short dives without any suits at all until he went a little sort of on the blue side. But nevertheless, we were actually diving. The equipment was very primitive. The demand valves were derived from the very early models used by Cousteau, I think, in the Second World War. The chap who became the first chairman of the club was my own doctor, actually, at that time. And when I come to join, when he said, when I came to put my name on the list for joining the club, he said, "What are you doing, thinking of going diving, you see?" I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, with lungs like yours." I said, "Well, what's wrong with my lungs?" He said, "Well," he said, you had pneumonia last year, you see?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm all right now." Well, he said, "Try it, but you be careful," sort of thing, you know. I mean, there are many fit retired people, and if they have a desire to do this, then there's nothing to stop them at all. In the same way that you could go parachute jumping or any of the other cliff climbing, and so on.
This thing started back in 1977. Dr. David Bellamy was the instigator, really, because he suggested to the Sub-Aqua Club that all the clubs should take part in what he called Underwater Conservation Year. And he proposed several projects for the club members to take part in. And most of the clubs in the country were involved, especially the coastal clubs that could get to the coast easily. And he had things like studies on starfish, on crabs, on urchins, and various things. Or he said, why not adopt a piece of rock face, and look at that over a period of a year and see what happens on it. Or have a project of your own. So I thought, yeah, I'd love to take part in that. And there must be one or somebody in the club who would do it with me. And Alan came to mind right away because I knew he was interested in marine life and had taken part with me in a previous similar thing. You know. When we started the project on the reef, first of all, we made all the list of all the animals and everything that moved, and we realized, well, look, there's all these seaweeds as well. Someone's got to make a list of that. As well as the sedentary animals like sponges and jewel anemones and things, there's all this other growth there. But I don't pretend to be an expert because there's a lot more to seaweeds than meets the eye, really. Some of them you cannot actually take it down to the species unless you've got a microscope. You need to look at the cross-section of the stems of the Polycygonias to be absolutely sure which one it is. They have a different sort of arrangement of tubes in the actual stem. But perhaps now I might be able to do that because I just bought a microscope, and I'm hoping to learn how to set this up to look at these things for myself. But I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of help from Dr. Bill Farnham, who was at the Hayling Island Laboratory, and particularly from Stella Turk, who runs the Cornwall Biological Records Unit in Poole. I've got a collection of something like 113 different seaweeds from around this area. 64 of them are on this little reef of ours that we've been looking at. And of the total of the 113 that I've got, I think it's 27 of them are new records for the area, and about 18 of those are actually on the reef. I'm always amazed that the colours stay so well. What I do is to take them back home and actually I wash them in fresh water. Some people say, no, don't, you must keep them in salt water, but I put them actually into fresh water, let them soak for an hour or two in fresh, and then I bring them out into a little shallow tray, a photographer's tray, in about a quarter of an inch of water, and spread them out. I've got a bit of paper in the bottom of the tray to start with, a bit of cartridge paper, and then I just lift it out. I sort of tease it out to shape with a paintbrush, and then lift it out slowly, and then I put them all into presses, blotting paper.
I suppose that we thought that we were looking at things that everybody knew something about. But we quickly realized when we started asking questions about what we were seeing that although people knew could identify the species that we were seeing, they knew nothing about their lifestyle or their how they actually lived underwater. They could identify them biologically because people who had specimens and things for a long, long time. And we realized that we were in a position to report things or to study species that hadn't been studied in any detail before. in the second year, we had this very large plankton bloom, which resulted in mortality of a lot of creatures on our side, in particular sea urchins and otter shells and a few other creatures who were badly affected. And when we reported this to the director of the Marine Biological Institution at Plymouth, Association at Plymouth, they were fascinated by it because they invited me to write a paper on it. In fact, I wrote what I saw, and we wrote what we saw rather, and he then transferred it into technical jargon for the purpose of a scientific paper. But to get your name on a paper in the Journal of the Marine Biological Association is almost unheard of, I imagine, for amateurs. But they invited us to do it because we had been in this unique position of actually seeing it happen. They knew that they knew that these mortalities occurred quite naturally in these plankton blooms, but nobody, or I say nobody, it's probably too strong, but few people have actually been in a situation where they knew what there was there beforehand, and then 1 week, and then go back and see what's happened the next week.
A couple of years ago, we were invited to apply for the Duke of Edinburgh's. We didn't think about it ourselves, actually. Someone phoned up Alan and said, well, would you like to apply for the Duke of Edinburgh's award thing? Which is a competition, actually, because there's various people put in for it, and then the Duke chooses the final entry.
The Duke of Edinburgh Award is a prize given through the auspices of the Sub Aqua Club Jubilee Trust, and it's given annually for a project which is deemed to have scientific and conservation merit.
Anyway, this is a picture of Alan and I at the Palace. We went there in November of last year, and to receive the Duke of Edinburgh's Award for Underwater Science. And this is awarded yearly by the Jubilee Trust of the British Sub Aqua Club. And we waited in the room for about half an hour until he came in, and then he was introduced to the three club officials. And then he came to the two white-haired old codgers on the end of the line, and we were introduced only by name. And he said, and who are you, the judges? And I said, no, Your Royal Highness, we're the winners. And he was a bit taken aback for a moment, and then said, oh yes, I've read your report, you've been doing this for 12 years, so you had to be a bit older than that lot over there, pointing at the young divers on the other side of the room.
There wasn't a great deal of difference in Penzance. In one respect, it's been a little to do with its downfall, in the fact that the city fathers have always tried to keep the place from being invaded by the big multinationals, and in effect missed their way, because it's only recently that we've had a supermarket of any size in the place. And of course the supermarkets in other areas outside have tempted shoppers away. On the other hand, it's a very, very good place to live. It's a place where it's too large to be parochial and small enough to have an identity in. And it has another great attribute, and that is that people don't tend to move away. You don't get the population turnover that you get in the southeast or other areas of high activity. And consequently, people really get to know people, and you can go down the town, you know, you're never short of a conversation if you want one. Ray and I are very, very similar in some respects and not in others. I think we're similar in the fact that we're reliable to one another. We're complementary in our outlook on things. And I think that helps a great deal. I think that he takes one side of things and I take the other, and we're between us and then socially, of course, we've always got on. But we have a lot of things in common. Again, the business of individual pursuits, and he rock climbs, and he's done a lot of camping, and he's fell walking and that sort of thing.
I've managed to do a lot of things that I wanted to do since I've retired. For instance, I've been back to Wales and climbed a few of the mountains I wanted to do. In fact, I've still got one I must do. In the Snowdon group, there's 14 peaks at over 3,000 feet. And I've done 13 of them, and there's one that I still haven't been to, and I've got to do that. And it's not that it's a difficult one to get up at all. It's just the one that's most remote, and you have to either walk a very long way or else climb over the second highest one there to get to it. This is the Japanese knotweed, and we have patches of this all over valleys of Cornwall and on some of the heathlands like this. It's been brought in somehow into the country, and it's a very invasive sort of plant, and it seems to take over an area. And on a reserve that we have, the nature reserve we have at Kemiel Crease, yesterday we were rooting this stuff out, taking it up, big patches of it. We are afraid that this stuff will spread right through the woodland, and so while it's still a reasonably small patch, we thought we'd better get it out before it takes it over.
I was fairly interested in the concept of video, but until this last 12 months, that it's none of the cameras that had an acceptable performance were within my price range. And it was shortly after Christmas when they started discounting them at quite a hefty rate. And I found this particular model, which is I think last year's budget model. I got it. The motive for getting it was mainly to record aspects of holidays and to record the antics of my grandchildren. But I soon found by a certain amount of experimentation that the Video 8 is a very good medium for close-up work. I'm fortunate in having a very small pond in the garden that the frogs come to spawn in, something like about 30 frogs, even though the pond only holds about 200 gallons of water. About 30 frogs come each winter, about Christmas time, and spawn, and generally sort of croak and hang about for about 2 months. I'd become, with many wild creatures, it's possible to approach them quite closely, provided you don't do any violent movements and scare them away. And this is certainly true of frogs. And frogs are very good subjects because they do spend quite a lot of time standing still. And with the use of the magnifying glass on the video, I was able to still use the zoom and therefore get the effect of focusing on parts like eyes and so on the frogs, and then zooming backwards to show the whole animal. I had bikes I had Triumphs after the war, and then one or two strokes and things when I first came down here. Then I had a Bond mini car, which was a halfway stage, a three-wheeler, which we did epic trips in. With it, that had a 197cc two-stroke engine of 7.5 horsepower. We did 300-mile trips in it at an average speed of 23 miles an hour or something. But then after that, it went to then when the children were small, I didn't ride a bike. Well, I couldn't afford both anyway.
Hi, on the bike. Hello. Yes, please. Come in. Nice to see you. All right.
What's that you've got? Eh? What's that you've got?
Boy, go on.
Come on, shoot it up. I suppose that my retirement, which I started 10 years ago, has probably been the most enjoyable time of my life. Partly because you have freedom from financial stress. Although I only have a moderate pension, at least I don't have to worry about where the next meal's coming from. And the children are grown up, and you can send the grandchildren back when they get a bit awkward. And so you can live a life where there's little stress. It's easy to have a relaxed life if there are none of these great pressures which normally affect you when you're younger. When they've gone away, then it makes it so much easier.
Well, we formed the dolphin group here, what, five years ago, something like that. It was instigated by Dr. Tregenza, who was the chairman of the Cornwall Naturalist Trust. He was very concerned about the sort of state of the dolphins and cetaceans around this coast, because there have been reports going back sort of 40 years when hundreds of dolphins were seen coming inside Mousehole, between Mousehole and the island each summer. You don't see that today. There are obviously a lot of reasons why that there are less, and I think some of them are the fact that the fish that they eat are no longer here. Used to be a lot of herring, a lot of pilchard, a lot of mackerel, things like that, and you don't get the fish like that here now. And so we set up this group to study the thing, and each time we get sightings, we get reports to find out what dolphins are actually around. And we've set up a watch from the old Coast Guard hut at Cape Cornwall. And we've got volunteers, not only from the Cornwall Naturalist Trust, but from outside it. I think some of them are actually joining the trust now, who are covering most daylight hours since last September.
Any dolphins? Or seals? Any seals or dolphins? We had the great fortune to be diving with this wild dolphin that had become interested in divers for over a period of about 18 months. And diving with this dolphin was a very, very unusual experience. Dolphins seem to have an extraordinary calming effect on you. I mean, they're a very large thing, and they've got a great big mouth with rows of, what looks like masses of amounts of teeth, and they look as if they could do you a lot of harm if they wanted to. But in actual fact, they're a very sensual sort of animal. I mean, if you, with this one, you could scratch his tummy and his eyes would sort of half close, and it obviously lives for pleasure, if you like. The other thing about them is that they seem to know where all the bits of them are. I mean, they never bash you with their tails. They come very close to you from time to time. I mean, sometimes when you're sort of down on the bottom and he wanted to go up and get some air because you can stay down longer than the dolphin can. He'd come up a matter of inches from your face. His body would start to glide upwards, and you'd think, where's his tail? And it would just sort of come slowly past you without even so much as ruffling the water around you. And when he was in a more boisterous mood, he could come at you at an enormous speed and sort of turn in his own length and thrash his tail up and down in front of your face, when you're on the surface, it is, without actually touching you. And he did it just for a bit of fun. And I think probably the experience of diving with the dolphin was one of the main highlights of our diving experience, for that matter. And he did occasionally turn up on the reef.
I think the danger in diving is people trying to do things that they're not qualified to do, and that's about the only danger. But if you're properly trained, it's one of the safest sports in the world. And the club has now been going for 30 years, since 31 years, and we haven't had an accident in the club. I'm going to have to dive later in the year with somebody else because he's going away for a month or so and over his trailer tent, and I'll have no one to dive with unless I go with the club. Main reason for not going with the club is that they now tend to go much deeper than I want to go. I mean, I used to dive a lot, down 130, 150 feet, and think nothing of it. But when you're older, you have to be a little bit more careful about depth because you absorb nitrogen much quicker. And you would get into decompression time, it's much quicker, and you would have to plan your dive rather differently from the man you're diving with if he's a much younger person.
One of the beauties of underwater activity is that you can choose the site and the duration and the weather conditions to suit yourself. I mean, I realise I'm not 16 anymore, and I can't sprint in a way that the young people in the club can. But I've got a certain amount of endurance, and provided I'm not exposed into very strong tidal currents, then I can keep up with the rest of them. But in fact, you find that you tend to choose the less extreme activities, and that is no problem because you can always arrange a dive even off the shore in 15 feet of water and enjoy it.
Well, we occasionally see basking sharks, yes. They come around the reef, and marvellous things to watch. In fact, some of our members have actually managed to hold on to the tail of one and get a ride, but I've never been able to swim fast enough to catch one because although they look as though they're ambling along, they're actually moving quite fast. The basking shark is, although it's perhaps one of the biggest sharks, there's only one shark which is bigger, and that's the whale shark. I mean, they can get up to 30-odd feet long, but they're absolutely harmless. They just go around with their mouth open, taking in great gulps of water and sifting out the food. They're plankton feeders. They have no teeth, as it were, so that they avoid you rather than come for you if they're in the water. You're lucky if it stays around. to go on for a few years yet. We always say that we'll give up diving when we can't put each other's wetsuit off, because we find that's the hardest part of diving.
Well, I certainly hope to be diving when I'm 80. That's only another 10 years away, whatever it is. So, we don't know. I mean, the thing is, if you crack up in the meantime, it's hard luck, isn't it?
That's all this week. Next week, a little backstroke to return upstream to a subject we looked at last week, the theatre. A lot of you have contacted us to say